settled in bed? Or have you picked your target yet? Listen, babe. Got your dog bite? Listen, babe.
Oh joy, it is October 2nd. We are in October. I think the last genuine online for maintenance that I did was back in August, maybe July. I think we're like 2 months without a proper episode. But anyway, I'm Connor, and you, of course, are listening to Online for Maintenance, the official podcast of MMO Fallout. You can check us out at mmofallout.com, on Patreon, who lovingly support the show and the things that I do on the internet. That is patreon.com/mmofallout. You can go ahead and join for as little as $1 a month, get access to the show a day early on the weeks/months/fiscal quarters that I actually show up to record an episode. And yeah, I guess that you can find me on Twitter at mmofallout, and on my movie review website where I talk about the movies that I watch. That is howaboutnot.com. And it sounds like I'm being sarcastic, but that's the actual domain name. Patrons, of course, get access to the podcast a day early, and I know I say this about every 5 or 6 months, but I am planning on doing more stuff for the Patreon. I don't want to make it something that I'm pretending to withhold really high quality content from the public, but I plan to do more stuff on the books that I'm reading, the movies that I'm watching, and I might have a little bit of an opinion piece on the film The Greasy Strangler, which is really something to watch if you've never heard of it, or if you've heard of it but have been a little too scared to try it out. But the website stuff has been going on. We've been doing website stuff here and there, and I've been a little busy behind the scenes with some other stuff going on in life. But time moves on, the news happens, and I decided to reformat the show a little bit in the form of questions, because I found that I can kind of go off on a tangent when I ask myself a question, or when I'm kind of responding to questions that I see online. And if the microphone sounds a little different this week, I'm using the Blue Yeti microphone, and I hope that it doesn't suck. I've had this thing for years, but I recently bought a new desk. I haven't figured out how exactly I'm going to set up the boom microphone, so I guess it's just going to have to go with this for the time being. I broke the pop filter off of my other microphone, and that's going to be an issue going forward. But we'll see how this microphone sounds. It'll probably be better than the July show, because that one had traffic going by my house because my windows were open. We'll see. So for today, the first little piece I wanted to bring up was a question that I wrote myself about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I am not sure exactly when, but the first question that I wrote for the new podcast format was, are $200 Steam laundering games coming back? And I think it's very safe to say, after all this time, that the answer is no. And if you know what I'm talking about, then, well, congratulations, you probably read the website. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Steam as a platform, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been following and kind of documenting the fact that Steam has an issue with money laundering, as does every giant store. Every giant store, every big kind of financial institution, and Steam specifically has had phases that its money laundering has gone through. And the original phase, the thing that kind of kicked it off, was the the $200 video game. And these $200 games, they showed up, and for a while people were kind of baffled by their existence. What are these games? Why do they cost $200? Why do most of them look like they came off of an assembly line? They look like they were made. A bunch of them we were able to track down and find that they were made with pre-made game tutorial kits. So like you can go on the Unity store and find a $40 or like a free or a $10 or a $20 Flappy Birds clone. And what some of these people were doing was they were taking those kits or just pirating them and making a game, putting it up on Steam for $200. And the reason that it got a little bit of attention as a money laundering tool in the early days was that people would find these games and they'd share them on the Steam Reddit, they'd share them on forums and say, haha, look at this piece of shit. Who would buy this? First of all, who would buy this for $1, let alone $200? Maybe the developers added another zero. Maybe the developers are Chinese. They might have added another zero. They might not understand conversion rates. They don't understand that $200 American is not the same value as, say, like 200 yen. But it went around as a joke for quite a while, and then what really solidified the games being used as money laundering was one of them screwed up, and they went a little bit too far. And I can't remember the name of the game. You could probably go back, go on Google and find it, but there was a $200 money laundering game that they sold so many copies that it made it to the top seller list. And that's what really drew the public eye to the idea of, oh, the theories are right. These games are being used for money laundering. And it makes sense when you look into it, and I think it really drew more people's eyes to the idea of what is involved in money laundering. Because when you think of the Steam you think of the Steam agreement that Valve has with developers, and Valve takes the industry standard 30% cut. And you think, wow, money laundering, a 30% cut, that's a big cut when you're trying to steal money. But ultimately, from the things that I've looked into, a 30% cut in money laundering is not a bad deal at all. So you had a bunch of games that popped up at $200, and most of them, and I ended up tracking a large number of these games, and by large number I mean a dozen, 24 of them, and virtually all of them to date have been banned from the Steam store. And I want to say that the ones that haven't been banned are definitely on Valve's radar, but they might have been abandoned. Like the developers got banned for the other games that they created money laundering titles out of, and they may just be leaving these ones sit for a future date when they hope that kind of the eyes of Valve are not on them, because I think at this point Valve is pretty quickly swooping in to ban these games. And it makes sense, because if you have you take Valve, and Valve is a company that very much likes to automate everything. If they can automate it, if they can outsource the work to the community, they are peachy keen about supporting whatever endeavor it is. And I think with Valve, with a lot of these systems, it's something that you can very easily automate. You know, if a game comes out at over $100, have the system pull it to the side and just keep an eye on it. And what you would do is you would have you would have a flag. If a game comes out at $200, it has no wish lists, it has no organic user interaction, it has nothing to suggest that it is a real game by real developers with real outreach. And then 30 accounts buy it out of the blue. 30 accounts, all those accounts were created within the last month. All of them buy the game for $200. It's something that is very easy to flag. And I think it's something that, Valve built the systems for, because we've seen a lot more of these games get blasted. And I've seen a lot of these very obvious money laundering games get, kind of shot out of the sky before they really have a chance to launch. And a lot of them are getting banned even before they release, which means that Valve is, even if they're letting the games on the, they're letting the developers submit the games, they're kind of catching them before they launch. And the $200 laundering games were the first generation of those titles, and they occasionally come back one at a time, never quite in the same quantity as they did before, and I think Valve does a lot better job of catching them at this point. And the $200 money laundering games gave way to the item money laundering, which is again something that showed up. It was a problem for a while. You can go back at the beginning of 2022. I talked a lot about how Valve were banning money laundering games using the item marketplace. And in this case, what Valve does is what the developer does is they put up items in the marketplace requiring quite a bit less trust, because you don't need, I don't believe that you need a trusted account to create item marketplace stuff, which is what we saw years ago when developers would create fake Counter-Strike items and use it to scam people. But what you would see with this is they'd create items and then they would sell it on the marketplace. And I think the idea behind that was that it was a lot less visible. But all of Valve's marketplace transactions are public, meaning that I can go into some game that has been out for a week, see the marketplace transactions, and realize that, hey, they're selling some piece of shit JPEG for, and 29 people have bought it for $350 a piece. Yeah, that's money laundering. And back in the day, the games would get banned, and I'd be able to look into their history and see that, oh, they were money laundering, but they did it 4 months ago. It's done. And what I noticed more recently, again, is that Valve has gotten on top of things, and they're starting to ban a lot of these games before they're even released or within like a week. And I want to think that with a lot of these games, what's happening is that the game is launching and Valve is seeing, okay, we're going to put the titles, we're going to put new untrusted titles and have our system just keep an eye on them, just the automated system. Because if a game comes out and it's new and nobody's playing it, specifically if nobody's playing it, because nobody was playing these games. They had a player count of like 4 to 5 people. No interaction in the game's discussion board, nothing, no reviews, nothing. So if a game comes out, nobody's playing it, and then suddenly the system detects that there's items being traded for $100, $400, $500, well, that's very obviously money laundering. And that's something that even in the automated system can flag to Valve and boot the game off the system. Because it's very obvious what's going on at that point. What the people, if you think about it, what they should be doing And the reason I think that they do it with these games is because, and this is speculation on my part, I think that the developers have the ability to cash those items out. Or they're doing it in such high quantities that the portion the developer takes is part of what's being laundered. Because you go into these games and you'll see dozens and dozens upon transactions of hundreds of dollars, and that's like, you know, 30, 50 bucks for a $300 to $500 transaction. I think the developer takes 10% or 5%. But it's basically a long, convoluted way of laundering the money, and, you know, laundering money, it's supposed to be long and convoluted. But Valve seems to be catching it. And I notice with a lot of these games, you see these really crappy games show up, and I think that a lot of them they're either from the same people or they're using the same tech, because they all have this weird item generator A item on the list. And I don't know quite what that means. But I know it's not something that's normal in the system. Like I said, they're getting better. Valve have gotten better. I see a lot more games that get banned prior to launch. There's a lot more kind of they've been a lot more heavy-handed when it comes to pushing out developers that really don't need to be on Steam. And it's not perfect. Like, you still have the Tiger QQ guy, who I noticed really hasn't been releasing anything, and I kind of gotta wonder if that's something that's going on behind the scenes, because this Tiger QQ, if you know, it's a developer that puts out DLC by the hundreds. This guy, the last time I checked, he had like 2,900 pieces of DLC for 30 games. And they're all computer-generated levels for his side-scrolling shooters. And I think they're all fake. I don't even know if, like, I would be very hesitant to actually buy them and test it out. But it is what it is. It's a little bit of an update on the Steam money laundering and how it's a story that I really like talking about at the time, and I'm kind of glad I don't have to talk about it nearly as much nowadays, because it doesn't happen so much. I don't have to complain about how Valve is very slowly and incompetently reacting to bad actors using Steam, because they're reacting to bad actors using Steam. So, good things all around. Like I said, I really don't want to be the guy that shows up and says, hey, bad things are happening. It's not what I try to mold my content around. But sometimes we don't have a choice. Like this week, because this isn't going to be one of those I told you so's. Because anyone with an inkling of foresight could have seen this coming. Everyone except for maybe the fanboys. But Stadia is dead. We learned this week, Google announced Stadia is dead. It is going to shut down, and there were some surprises, I will say. Google and Stadia, this is a streaming service. If you've somehow been living under a rock, Google Stadia is and was kind of the premier streaming service outside of on PC, because you had back in the day Gaikai, OnLive, a bunch of kind of smaller scale operations, and then PlayStation Now was the big video game streaming service for years, but it was very specialized. But Google Stadia came out a few years ago. I know. I pre-ordered the Google Stadia Founders Pack with the controller and the Chromecast Ultra, and the whole time I was using it, I kind of told people, don't buy games on here. I kind of like the $10 subscription service because it was what it was. For $10 a month, you get access to a few different games here and there, and you have kind of it's sort of like PlayStation Plus, where you have the growing library of games that increases on a monthly basis. And the games weren't great, which is why I ultimately canceled my subscription about a year ago and really never looked back. But you knew what you were getting, as opposed to, buying a game for full price, or in some cases more expensive than what it was on other storefronts, and only having access to it through the streaming platform, which means that if Stadia was having problems, you were out of luck. It means that if your internet was having problems, you were out of luck. If your ISP throttled you, you were out of luck. Bad connection day. You're just screwed all around. And what I'd been saying for years was that you shouldn't be buying games on Stadia. Whatever you think that you're saving by not having a dedicated system, you're going to get screwed down the line. It makes far more sense to buy a secondhand, for the amount of money that you would spend on a controller. Like, you could buy a used Xbox One or PlayStation 4 at the time for $200, which is virtually nothing. If you're buying games on Stadia, and the games on Stadia weren't cheap, you could get an Xbox or a PlayStation. And the benefit of that being that Xbox and PlayStation at the time, especially in 2019-ish, those games, they were getting pretty cheap. You can get early Xbox and PlayStation games for a few bucks. Quite a bit. Gaming, if you're not trying to play every game the day that it releases, gaming is really, really cheap. There's sales all the time, especially since the PS4, Xbox One era, where Microsoft and Sony have been more willing to do really deep sales. So every time you go on the PlayStation Store, Xbox Store, there's usually some big sale of notable games that are under $20, under $10, some kind of deal. And gaming has never been cheaper. Again, if you're not looking to play every game the day that it comes out. And it's something that, I pointed out with Ubisoft games, where I say, I've reviewed a few of the games, and I've said, hey, if you're on the shelf about this, or if you're on the fence about this, just wait a month, because the game is going to be cheaper. And we've seen with a lot of the games in the past, Ubisoft, Square Enix, many of these companies, especially the games that release around this time of the year, where with Black Friday coming up, where they are 50% off 2 months or a month in some cases after launch. So Stadia was a really bad proposition from a business point, from a consumer point, and ultimately Stadia became what I think it should have been from the start. And I think that if Google hadn't spent tens of millions of dollars trying to secure certain exclusives and Ubisoft games for Stadia, that it would have had a longer shelf life. And toward the end, Google really went all out on the click to play idea, with the whole goal being that developers would, I think developers would pay to have their game, to use the infrastructure. And the idea was that you could click on a link, play the demo, or play a time trial, or play a curated part of the game that the developer wanted to show you. And I like the idea behind that, because you could have, say, let's have the Game Awards. Jeff Keighley goes up on stage and he says, hey everyone, good news, we got Final Fantasy 16, and you can play a 2-hour demo of the game right now. You can go on to the PlayStation Store, Xbox Store, and download the demo if that's your thing. But if you want to play it just if you want to play it now and you have a decent internet connection, click on this link and you can play the demo streaming, no trouble. Just instant. Because that's, the big thing with the consoles is that people are constantly worried about hard drive space. And the hard drive space, the expansion hardware on the new consoles is not cheap. I think for 512 gigabyte, for a 512 gigabyte expansion card for the Xbox Series consoles, it's like $140, and the terabyte is like $200. But the idea of being able to click on a link and get these trials, it's a really good business opportunity, and it's something that if Stadia had been scaled to that rather than trying to make it a storefront for the last 3 years, I think that the service would have been small. It would not have lost as much money as Google did with Stadia, because they obviously spent a ton of money on securing some of these games that never sold. And I think it would have had a longer shelf life. I think that people would have had far more of a positive outlook on Stadia if it had just been essentially a glorified promotional tool. Because at that point, it's very inoffensive. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to use it. But there's also no preconception of it being a storefront. So like, you don't have Cyberpunk being sold for $60 on the service that could probably shut down out of the blue, because who cares if it does, because there's trials now on PlayStation Plus. It's less of a thing when you're talking about promotional demos being taken off the internet as opposed to people losing their purchases. And that was the big thing that kept me from promoting Google Stadia, was that if the service shuts down, you are screwed. If in a few years Microsoft decides that their xCloud streaming was a bust, you still have access to the games that you own because they're on Xbox. You can play them on your Xbox console. Some of them you can play on your PC, but the whole ecosystem doesn't shut down because Google or because Microsoft shuts down xCloud. But when Google shuts down Stadia, everything is gone. The games are gone. Your saves are gone, because your saves are all in the cloud. And now we're hitting a point with Stadia shutting down where people are like, oh, you have the people who, oh, I put 400 hours into Ghost Recon. What the hell is going to happen to my save is going to be gone? Or people with accounts. I've been trying to figure this out myself. People with accounts in the Elder Scrolls Online, what's going to happen to them? That's an MMO. There's no account transfers. ZeniMax hasn't made a statement about it. You have RPGs and all these games that have hundreds of hours in it. Ubisoft has said that they're working on getting games ported over to Ubisoft Connect, so people can keep the things that they bought. And I think part of that is also because maybe Ubisoft doesn't want to give refunds. I don't know how much of that is actually coming out of the developers' pockets, because Google is refunding everything, hardware, software, and I'm not entirely sure how that fits in with the developers. Like, are the developers losing everything, or is Google eating the cost? It's one of those things to think about. But that surprised me, that Google is refunding everything, which means personally that I got a free Chromecast Ultra. I got a $100 deal out of this. Although I think I spent that much back in Google Stadia subscriptions. But I got a free Chromecast out of it. I was surprised, because I'd been telling people for the last 3 years that if Google Stadia shuts down, you're probably not going to get a refund. And I think that logically you can probably have assumed that there wouldn't be a refund for it, because we've seen we are long away from the days of Sony Online Entertainment or NCSoft shutting stuff down and kind of giving people refunds. You see it every now and then, but it's definitely not. It's definitely not the norm, and I would say it's definitely not the norm for a service that's been up for 3 years to just blanket give people refunds. And Google can eat those costs, but when you think about it, you would expect that they would say, well, we had it up for 3 years. You got your money's worth, and it didn't work out. Good luck in your future endeavors. But Google is eating the cost, and that surprises me more than anything. And I want to say it's that the company has got to have its head on fire, because if there's one thing that we learned from Stadia failing and Stadia shutting down, it's that Google's reputation is horrible. Google's reputation as a company that treats its services and its products like hobby projects has finally hit the point where a big Google product has failed because people assumed that it would fail. People did not buy games on Stadia because of Google's reputation for wanton shutting down its projects. And as a result, Google Stadia was unsuccessful and Google shut it down. That's a big problem for a multi-billion-dollar company when their reputation essentially ensures that their products fail. And I remember that happening with Google Glass, where a lot of people didn't buy it because they said, hey, it's Google. Google sucks. Google shuts down their stuff. I don't want to be left with a worthless piece of crap in a few years when Google gets bored with it and decides to shut it down. I don't want to be left with a useless piece of hardware, and that's exactly what happened. So Google, they've got to be meeting and thinking like, okay, how do we disassociate future projects with the Google brand? Because the Google brand is poison, and people don't want to adopt services because they think that we will shut it down within a few years because we have such a long history of shutting things down within a few years and just kind of abandoning it, and in many cases abandoning it and moving on to a very similar project, like when Google abandoned Google Play and replaced it with YouTube Music, or when Google just kind of Google replaced its chat with Google Hangouts, and then I think they replaced Hangouts with something else that's very similar. Like I said, they have a horrible reputation, and it's only getting worse, and it's starting to have it's having a material effect on their success, because it means that they have to think about it. They really have to fix the narrative. They have to fix their reputation, and good luck to whatever executive gets the job of doing that, because I guarantee that person's going to be very quickly retiring from Google to spend some less stressful times after that initiative fails. And it's just kind of interesting all around to me that Google, one of the biggest and most powerful tech companies, cannot launch a gaming service because their reputation is that bad. And then you have, Amazon kind of scooting along with Luna, and the only PlayStation having to integrate PS Now into PS Plus, and the only one that really seems to be going far and away with it is Microsoft. it's just something to think about. The fact that, like, you'd think Google would be on top of things, and they screwed it up. And everything for their reputation is, without a doubt, 100% earned. And I wanted to talk a little bit this week about dupes. Very shortly. We haven't had a big dupe story in quite a while. And I got two games. New World, of course, recently shut down its trading post for a couple of days, and because they had a dupe. And Wild Terra 2 also had a rollback today over a vulnerability that opened up duplication. They say, friends, unfortunately, hackers discovered a dupe vulnerability. We made a forced rollback to the previous database save last day. We need your help. If someone has encountered accidental duplication of items, then please tell us in as much detail as possible under what circumstances this happened. The player with whom we can find reproducibility will be given a reward. Any of the packs of your choice, except Master of the World. You can even choose from those that are no longer on sale. Okay, that's fine. I'm kind of surprised that it's taken this long for a duplication glitch to show up in Wild Terra 2. Because you would imagine a Unity engine game made by 4 people would have some more exploits in it. But I don't know. I really have a lot less to say about this topic than I did on the other ones. Duplication is one of those crazy things that it comes around every now and then. It's really less about the duplication than about the developer's response to it, because you have developers, you have folks like XL Games and Tryon Worlds with ArcAge, where the duplications really weren't dealt with, and I don't believe in many cases that they were able to roll back the servers or get a lot of the stuff out of the economy, which is, I guess, part of the reason why the fresh start servers became such a thing, where it's, now that we've ruined our world, let's create a new world where those bad things from the past have not happened. I don't know. A lot of things happening on the internet. A lot of games coming out. I do stand by, speaking of the streaming services, I do stand by the value of Xbox Game Pass for $15 a month for the for Game Pass Ultimate. It really is the, if you're a person who doesn't really care about playing games over and over again, or really if you're just kind of the type who you kind of go from game to game, and you have an Xbox or you have a gaming PC, then Xbox Game Pass, in my opinion, is still one of the better deals. And Xbox Game Pass, they announced they had some good games come out recently. The Deathloop that I've been playing, it's a first-person shooter. It is very much an Arcane Bethesda Softworks game. It plays very much like Arcane's other titles, but it is fun. I haven't played too much of it yet, but what I have been playing, and I brought this up on the last podcast, what I've been playing a lot is an early access game, and people are going to I'm going to lose some respect with some of my listeners on this. I've been playing a lot of Disney Dreamlight Valley, and I've been playing, I don't know how much I've been playing. I'm kind of afraid to find out, because I've been playing it on my Xbox, and oh good lord, I just read it. Oh no, that's the How Long to Beat. So I've been playing Disney Dreamlight Valley, and oh no, that's not even better. I've been playing Dreamlight Valley. Dreamlight Valley is a Disney game. It's very much like Animal Crossing with Disney characters. The whole idea of it is that you go into the valley, you show up in the Dreamlight Valley, and you have a couple of Disney characters, and then you open up new areas. You raise your friendship level with the characters, and you do different tasks. One of the big tasks that you do is every day characters have favorite items that they want you to bring them. And you can bring them those items that it brings up their friendship level far more than just giving them stuff. You can hang out with them, which is a great way of raising levels. And right now in the game, there are 17 characters, and I have unlocked 16 of them. I'm just missing Prince Eric. And they have, in the castle, you can go to different worlds that are around, and they're very small. They're almost the size of a studio apartment, most of them. But you can walk around, and they're themed after different Disney properties. Like, you get, as of right now, you have access to the Ratatouille Kitchen, Moana's Island, the Frozen World, and Wally's World. And they're very small areas. Usually you only have to go in there for a quest. There's really not much going in there outside of doing the quest to bring the character to your island. And ultimately, there's a ton of characters. Most of them are not in the game yet because it's in early access. But there's something like, there's over 30, I think there's over 30 characters, because I can see in the achievement list that there's an achievement for 30 houses, which is ridiculous. But also several characters stay in the same house. Like Elsa, Anna, and Kristoff are already in the game, and they stay in the same house. And the game is kind of cramped right now, and I can't imagine how cramped it will be when you have 30 houses, as opposed to the, I think, like 10 or 12 that are in the game right now. But it is fun. It's one of those it's like Animal Crossing and Harvest Moon, where you kind of have the brunt of the content, where you're doing a lot of talking, you're doing a lot of missions, you're doing a lot of building, you're doing a lot of grinding, and then once that's done, you just sort of integrate into the world and just sort of have your daily routines, gathering stuff, farming stuff, doing your duties. I've kind of hit a point where I've unlocked most of what the game has to offer at this time. And apparently there's a lot of things in the game that are not in the game. Like, characters will ask for food that doesn't exist. There's somewhere in the realm of 1,000 outfits. But I did look at the achievement screen. I have 52 hours in this game so far. And what scares me more is the fact that I only have 3 achievements. Because the achievements in this game are like, give 540 gifts, complete 1,000 Dreamlight duties, build 30 houses, have 1,000 daily discussions, harvest 4,500 plants, collect 1.8 million star coins. And the more I catch 1,800 fish, mine 1,800 items, the more I play the game, the more I realize that it's not for children. And I don't mean that it's inappropriate for children. I mean that it's not a game that would keep the attention span of a child. Because I had trouble... I had trouble at points keeping up with this game, because there's a couple of parts of it that that require an intense grind to collect the items that you need for the quests. And there's just a lot of things to remember. There's a lot of things to keep track of and a lot of things to remember, like keeping up with the daily, there's stalls all around the island that you upgrade that have their own, there's certain seeds that you can only buy from those stalls, but the stock in the stall rotates every day. So sometimes you can get pumpkin seeds, sometimes you can't. And there's just all these different things, like every good in the game is area specific. Certain characters want certain things, and it's just a daily grind. It's not horrible, mind you. I've done pretty much everything in the game so far, playing it very inefficiently over the course of about 50 hours. And but I can't imagine how overwhelming this game is going to be in a year's time with all the content that they have that they're looking to release. Again, this game is overwhelming with 17 characters, and they're going to have like 35, 36 characters at launch, not counting whatever they add in after that. They're adding in Toy Story, they're adding in The Lion King, and you can just kind of imagine all the other characters that they're eventually going to add in, the items, the goods, the vegetables, the food, the outfits, the crafting things. It's ridiculous already, but it's going to get so much bigger. And like I said, it's not a game that I think would keep a child's attention for any string of time, or at the very least maybe like the first hour. But I don't see it being a game that kids would play for a long time. But if you have Game Pass, I recommend, if you have Game Pass and you enjoy that Animal Crossing and the Harvest Moon style, I would check it out. Plus, you get to be a Disney you get to be a pretty princess. Also on Game Pass, Valheim. If you're into more of a online cooperative sort of game, there is Moonscars, which is more of a side-scrolling hack and slash. There is Slime Rancher 2, recently came out, the sequel to Slime Rancher. And there's just a bunch of great stuff on Steam. Well, on Steam. On Game Pass, you have Ni no Kuni, Deathloop, Metal Hellsinger, which is the game where you try to... it's a metal rhythm shooter game where the whole goal is to try to shoot in rhythm with the music to do more damage. And upcoming games, they have Scorn is coming out on the 14th of October, Persona 5 Royal, Plague Tale Requiem. You got what's that game from High on Life? The game from Justin Roiland. The very obvious Rick and Morty, the video game. Because Justin Roiland has only one voice, and it's the kind of high-pitched, stuttering child voice. I think the game looks good. I have a feeling it's one of those games that's going to get really annoying really quick if they don't let you tone down how much the characters talk. And I'm not sure why the game has pre-install available, because it's not out for another 2.5 months. And that pre-install has been available for like a couple of months now. Oh boy. But we got the... eventually, of course, you have Activision Blizzard games coming to Game Pass. It's a value proposition that really only gets better over time. I like it. It's a good value. If you have a gaming computer, or if you have an Xbox One or an Xbox Series, it's a great value. And I've been wanting to do more stuff on the YouTube channel. Speaking of Xbox Game Pass, I've been wanting to do more. It came from Game Pass, and I've been waiting for Sony's mandate to go into effect, because when Sony announced that they had the new PlayStation, the new PS Plus, there was a mandate that went up for developers that within 3 months of the game's release, they have to put out a trial. Up to, I think it's 2 hours, it has to be. They have to put out a trial. It has to be out within 3 months, but I don't know when that mandate starts, and it might be at the end of the year, but we haven't seen it yet. And I'm still kind of waiting on that. But like I said at the start of the podcast, I thought I could get more content out of forming my topics in the shape of a question, and we got through like 3 things, and it's been nearly an hour. So I think that's how I'm going to go forward. And I think that we're sort of at a point where I'm hopefully back to the weekly schedule, Sundays for patrons, Mondays for everyone else. And I might be uploading these to my YouTube channel. Who knows? You never know. It could be Christmas time by the time we meet here again. But with that, I think I'm going to cut it out for the day. I'm Connor. You're listening to Online for Maintenance. And you can find me on patreon.com/MMOFallout. You can get this podcast wherever podcasts are sold on store shelves. And you can check us out, twitter.com/MMOFallout, and of course, MMOFallout.com. Until next week, I will say, hit the music.